Good morning to all. Welcome to another section of this online class. So today we will be dealing with the informatics paper, and in the last class we discussed about the history and development of computers and then the evolution of computers. So today we will be dealing with the major inventors including Charles Babbage and further details about the inventions of computers and also the history of computers in a very detailed manner. So first of all, regarding this paper, I will be dealing the first 4 modules, and I will be sharing with this paper with Divya Miss. So in the last class we discussed about the introduction to informatics and the definition of computers, then the evolution of computers, and today we will be dealing with the continuation to this evolution of computers. So in the last class we lastly discussed about the inventions by Charles Babbage. So he was basically he was a mathematical professor at Cambridge University. Then in 1823 he introduced the difference engine, which is the largest and most sophisticated mechanical calculator of his time. Then later he introduced the analytical machine, and he has a plan to develop a difference engine number 2 after developing the analytical machine, and he noticed that he could perfect his difference engine by using 8,000 parts rather than 25,000 and could solve up to 20 digits instead of 6 digits. So this is the concept by Babbage, and he drew the schematics for a difference engine number 2 between 1847 to 1849, and after 12 years he spent trying to get his difference engine number 2, but he had to give up because the British government was not interested in funding this project, and the machine was this machine and the technology to build the gears, cogs and levers for the machine did not exist in that time period. So this is the major reason in the while developing the difference engine number 2. So he had to give up this project, and later Babbage plans for a difference engine and difference engine number 2 were hidden away after his death and finally resurfaced around 150 years. So after his death, all these projects were again taken by some group of engineers, and they finally made these projects, especially the difference engine and difference engine number 2. So in 1991, a team of engineers at the Science Museum in London completed the calculating section of Babbage difference engine, and then in 2002 the same museum created a full-fledged model of the difference engine number 2 that weighs 5 tons and has 8,000 parts. So it worked perfectly just as Babbage had envisioned. So this is regarding the Charles Babbage inventions. Mainly we discussed the major 3 inventions by Charles Babbage. They are the difference engine, then difference engine number 2, and also the analytical machine. So this is regarding the major contributions by Charles Babbage. And we have another topic in this evolution of computers. It is based on Hermann Hollerith. So this is basically just like a story, and based on a true event in US, which is basically the census in US in 1890s. So at that time the officials at the US Census Bureau estimated that to take this census it would take 10 to 12 years to do this census. By this time they finished it would be by 1900, and they would have to do the census again. So this problem made them to calculate some more advancement in this technologies. So they to solve this problem they held a competition, and it called the proposals to do the census in a better way. So the major thing before this census is that all the data were entered with a manual. So there is no machines or no form of automated system for this census. So that is the reason why, because the census was up to take complete to take 10 to 12 years. So this was the major problem at that time. Then the problem was all the calculations for this census were performed manually. So this is the major cause to think about an advancement in this category. So they held a competition in order to get some proposals to do the census in a better way. So Hermann Hollerith, who is basically an inventor at that time, he was the winner of the competition, and he proposed the use of automation machines would greatly reduce the time needed to do the census. So this concept to do the use the automated machines to do the census was one of the major point or one of the major advancement during that time. So he then decided and built programmable card processing machines that would read, tally and sort data entered on punch cards. So this was the concept by Hermann Hollerith. And then the census data was coded onto cards using a key punch. Then these cards were taken to a tabulator and then or a sorter. So this tabulator means to count or tally these data, and this sorter means to order the alphabetically and numerically these details. So thus this census data was coded into cards with the help of these punch cards with the help of this key punch. Thus the Hollerith machines were not all-purpose computer, but they were a step in that direction. But basically they were, we can say that these machines were automated machines, and it helped to make the census in a better way. So they successfully completed the census in just 2 years. So this is the main difference in which the automated machines came, and it take some advancement in the technology in which it reduced the time to take the census. So before taking the census, it was up to 10 to 12 years, and after introducing this machine by Hollerith, it take just 2 years. So this is the basic difference between the machines and the manual form of data interpretation. So then the 1880 census had taken 80 years to complete, and the population was 30% smaller than this, and which means that automated processing was definitely more efficient to large scale operations. So this concept, which is the making the use of this automated process in the census, was one of the major inventions during that time. Then later Hollerith left this US Census Bureau to found the Computer Tabulating Recording Company. So a company was introduced or found by our Hollerith, who is basically a US person, and he left this US Census Bureau in order to found this company, which is the Computer Tabulating Recording Company. Then his punch card machines, which is used for the census, became national best sellers, and in 1924 the Hollerith's company changed its name to IBM. So this is very important. IBM means International Business Machine, and they were a group of companies after a series of mergers with the other similar companies. So this IBM was the very important contribution by Hollerith, in which it changed many ways to calculate the census or data interpretation and such other facilities. So the IBM, International Business Machine, was one of the major concepts during that time. Then we move to the next topic, which is the birth of computer. So in the last topic we discussed about the Hollerith, who invented a machine for this census in US, and it was very successful, and they completed the census within 2 years. So after that there was a change, a broad change occurred during that time, especially the beginning of 90s. Then the birth of computers were the period between 1940 to 1950. So we can divide this birth of computers into majorly two divisions. So the first division is regarding the World War II, and second division is regarding the von Neumann. So the World War II, in that time, the World War II brought concerns about how to calculate the logistics of such a large scale battle. So this was one of the major another problem to while the World War II. Then the US needed to calculate the ballistics deploy massive amount of troops and crack secret codes. So they have to make another machine in order to participate or efficient in this World War II. So the military started research projects for these tasks, especially to deploy some massive amount of troops and crack the secret codes, and also to calculate the ballistics. Then in 1931, the US Navy and the IBM began working together to build a general purpose computer. So the first general purpose computer was made between 1931 and 1935, and this general purpose computer was called as the Mark I, and the Mark I was the first computer to use the base 2 binary systems, and it was programmable, and it was used mainly the vacuum tubes, relays and magnets and gears in order to make this computer, which is the Mark I. And this project, the project of Mark I, was completed in 1944, and it had a memory of 72 numbers and performed the 23-digit multiplication in 4 seconds. So the technology became advancing day by day, in which all the advancement was especially in this technology, which is the computer technology. And in the Mark I, which was completed in 1944, was one of the major inventions during at that time, in which it had a memory of 72 numbers and it performed 23 digits multiplication in 4 seconds. So the time and the memory and also the all the process, all the time to take this process were limited into just like 4 seconds or into very small digits. So this was the major advancement during that time, and it was operational for the 15 years and performed many calculations for the US Navy during the World War II. So this Mark I was one of the successful general purpose computer during the World War II. Then the Mark I was still a mix of electronic and mechanical. So it was a major drawback, in which it was made up of a mix of electronic and mechanical, not purely on the electronic devices. So it basically it used to make this Mark I was the vacuum tubes, relays, magnets and gears. So all these things are both electrical and mechanical. So it was a major drawback of this Mark I computer. Then at the same time as the Mark I, however, there was another project take place. So after this developing this Mark I, after 1944, another project was taking place. So this project is the most important thing, which is the ENIAC. So ENIAC means electronic numerical integrator and calculator, and it was completed in 1946. So the background of this introduction to this ENIAC was, during the World War II, the US Army was building a new artillery that required the firing tables. So the firing tables was necessary while doing their operations in the World War II. So this US Army then find out to make all this calculation to a simpler form. In order to make all this data into a simpler form, these firing tables were created by a way of intense mathematical calculation that took a very long time to manually compute. So this was the background of introducing this ENIAC, in which to make this process quicker, which is making this firing tables, to make this firing tables very quicker, they started a project in 1943 and built a completely electronic device. So here we have the truly or completely electronic device, which is the ENIAC. So the full form of the ENIAC is Electronic Numerical Integrator and Calculator, and it was completed in 1946. And two major persons regarding this ENIAC was John Presper Eschard and John Macaulay. So these two persons, J. Presper Eschard and John Macaulay, these two inventors headed this project and eventually created this ENIAC, and it was one of the most successful during the age of World War II. And this project was completed in 1946, and the ENIAC had 18,000 vacuum tubes and absolutely gigantic, in which it was 100 feet long and 10 feet high, and also it weighed 30 tons. So this is regarding the major concepts of this or major dimensions of this ENIAC, and it was about 1,000 times faster than Mark 1 at multiplying numbers and 300 times faster at addition. So this is major difference between while we compare to this ENIAC to Mark 1, in which it was about 1,000 times faster than Mark 1 and at multiplying numbers and 300 times faster at addition. So this is major concepts by the ENIAC, and we discussed the major two inventions during the World War II. They are the Mark 1 and then the ENIAC. So these two computers or these two computing devices were most importantly successful during this World War II, especially these things, especially the Mark 1 and then the ENIAC, were used by the US Army in order to succeed in their campaign in this World War II. So last we discussed about the major inventions during the World War II, which comes under the topic birth of computers from 1940 to 1950. So we discussed about the Mark 1, which was one of the major inventions during that time, and the drawbacks of the Mark 1 was it was both mechanical and electrical machine. So it was major drawback. Then in 1946, J. Presper occurred and John Macaulay introduced the ENIAC, which was one of the most successful computers during that time, and it had 18,000 vacuum tubes, and absolutely it was gigantic, in which 100 feet long, then 10 feet high, and also it weighed 30 tons. And the major things regarding this ENIAC was it was about 1,000 times faster than the Mark 1, and at basically at multiplying the numbers, and then 300 times faster at addition. So this is the major difference between the Mark 1 and the ENIAC, and also this ENIAC was truly or the completely made up of electronic things. So we can say that this ENIAC is the first completely developed electronic device, and this is regarding all these inventions during the World War II, especially from this US Army or the during this World War II done by the US Army. So after Mark 1 and the ENIAC, we have another topic which is the second topic in this birth of computers. So the first topic was regarding the World War II, and the second topic regarding the von Neumann. So who is von Neumann? So John von Neumann, who is one of the major inventors during after this World War II, and he helped on this ENIAC and figured out how to make the computers better and better. So to make this ENIAC further advanced or make it better, the Neumann created the idea of stored computer program. So this is one of the major outbreak during that time, in which the idea of this computer program, in which to store this computer program was one of the successful inventions during this time, and Neumann created this idea of stored computer program, and we use today we use this concept on this stored computer program. And basically this concept of the stored computer program later developed as the form of operating systems in a computer. So the John von Neumann who helped to work on this ENIAC, the ENIAC was programmed externally with the wires and connectors and plugs. So the von Neumann wanted to make the programming something that was internalized. So all these things, all these wires and all these connectors were outside or external. So to make this all things internalized, so instead of rerouting these wires and plugs, a person could wire a different sequence of instructions that changes the way of computer runs. So this concept was very crucial while developing this stored program concept, in which instead of giving the instructions with the help of these wires and these plugs, a person could give all these commands. So this person is regarded as the program, the stored program, and later it is developed as the operating system, in which we gave some commands to this computer, and it gave the results with as soon as possible, or as faster as possible in the as the output in the monitor screen. So this was the major invention, in which to avoid these types of external things such as the wires, plugs, and these all these instructions from external. Von Neumann wanted to make all these things to internal. So the internal concept, or the advancement of this concept, was based on this thing, in which a person could write a different sequence of instructions, that process in which according to this process the computer will run. So this was the major outbreak during that time, and later this idea of the stored computer program was developed by von Neumann. So this is the most important thing regarding this inventor, who is the John von Neumann, and he helped to work the ENIAC much better than before. And with the help of this, the stored program idea, the idea of the stored program, it is still implemented today in computers that use the term von Neumann architecture. So the concept of this stored computer program was later known by the name von Neumann architecture, which is basically, or simply we can say that it is the significance, or the it denotes the idea of the stored computer program. So this is regarding the von Neumann concept, and we have the another major topic after this birth of computers, which is the first generation of computers. So we have 5 generations of computers, from first generation to fifth generation, from 1950 to 1985, and at the present stage we have divided all the generations of computers, all the ages of computers, into 5 major divisions. So we are going to look upon this topic, the first generation of computers, and the time period of this first generation computers was between the 1950 to 1957. So regarding the first generation computers, these computers, or during this time, the first generation computers used the thermonic tubes, which is known as the vacuum tubes, as basic elements. So in the first generation computers, the major thing they used to implement or to make the computers was the vacuum tubes itself, and it is called as the thermonic tubes. Then the key concept of the stored program was introduced by John von Neumann, as we said earlier. These programs and their data were located at the same memory. And regarding this memory, all these things are present at this today itself, because all these things are saved in one memory, which is called as the RAM. So the assembly language was used to prepare a programs and was translated into machine language for execution. Then the basic arithmetic operations were performed in a few milliseconds. So these are the major changes in these first generation computers, in which basic arithmetic operations were performed in a few milliseconds, and also all these language of executions were used with the help of this assembly language. And then the input-output functions were performed by the devices similar to typewriters. So the typewriters were considered as the first form of these input-output devices, and the magnetic core memories and the magnetic tape storage devices were also developed. So to store the data, they developed some storage devices which was based on some some basic things like the magnetic core and the magnetic tape storage devices. So this was the first form of the storage form of used in these computers. And for example, for this first generation computers were ENIAC, EDVAC, which is the electronic discrete variable automatic computer, then EDSAC, which is the electronic delay storage automatic calculator, and then the Mark I and the UNIVAC, which is the universal automatic computer. So we have the number of computers during the first generation of computers developed during this time. So they are, I repeat, ENIAC, then EDVAC, which is the electronic discrete variable automatic machine, then EDSAC, which is the electronic delay storage automatic calculator, then the Mark I that we discussed in the last topic, and the UNIVAC, which is the universal automatic computer. Then some of the advantages of these first generation computers were the vacuum tubes were the only electronic components available during those days. So this was one of the major advantages in which they used or they made the computer with the help of these vacuum tubes, because these vacuum tubes were all the only electronic components available during that time. Then vacuum technology, the technology which helped to build these computers, the vacuum technology made possible the advent of electronic digital computers. So this technology based on these vacuum tubes helped or made possible the advent of electronic digital computers, and also these computers were the fastest calculating devices of their time, and they could perform the computations in milliseconds. So this is the major advantage of this first generation computers, in which these computers were the fastest calculating devices, and also they are fastest, and because of this they could perform the computations in very milliseconds. So this is the major change during this first generation computer, in which we discussed that in the last thing, which is developed as the ENIAC. All the computations were faster, and the calculations were in seconds. So here we have the milliseconds, the introduction of milliseconds. It implies that all these calculations were very fast or very quick than the ENIAC and the Mark I, which we discussed earlier. So the major advantage, I repeat, the major advantage of these first generation computers were, firstly, the vacuum tubes were used, and these vacuum tubes were available during that time, which is the form of electronic devices, and the technology which is the vacuum technology, it helped or it performed as a very good manner to make the electronic digital computers during that time, and these computers were the fastest calculating devices of their time, and it can perform computation in milliseconds. So this is regarding the major advantages of the first generation computer. Then we have the major disadvantages of these first generation computers. So we have more number of disadvantages while compared to the advantages of this first generation computers. So the first point regarding the disadvantages of these first generation computers are, they were too bulky in size, and hence the very large area space was required in order to set up these computers. So the first point is the area or the size of these computers were very huge. They were bulky in size, and hence very large space required in order to develop or in order to implement these computers. And these computers were, the second point is, unreliable. So another important thing, disadvantages of this first generation computers was, these computers were unreliable. Then the third point is, the thousands of vacuum tubes that were used emitted large amount of heat and burned out frequently. So all these vacuum tubes were based on the heat or the technology of heat, and it produced a large amount of heat, and also it burned out frequently. So they have to use more vacuum tubes in order to use these computers. So this was the third disadvantage of this first generation computer. Then the fourth point is slow operating speed and restricted the computing capacity. So it was one of the major advancement during that time. It is also regarded as the slow operating speed. The operating speed was slow and the result was very quick. So this is the major difference between the advantages and disadvantages. In this section we only focuses on the disadvantages of this first generation computers. So the slow operating speed was one of the another disadvantages, and also it restricted the computing capacity. Then the another disadvantage is the high power consumption and short lifespan. So these computers consumed majorly high power, and also the duration or the lifespan of these computers were very short. So the maintenance was necessary in order to continue this process with the help of these computers. Then the air conditioning is required. So in order to reduce the heat, the air conditioning process is required in order to work this computer very quicker. Then another important disadvantage is that the prone of frequent hardware failure. So the hardware also failure during this time while using this computer, and also the constant maintenance required. So I said earlier, the major drawback of these computers, first generation computers, were the maintenance. So the constant maintenance were required, and also another most important thing is that they were non-portable. So as we use the laptops or the mobile phones, which all these things are the example for the portable computers or the form of portable devices. So the first generation computers were non-portable, and another important thing is that the manual integration of individual components into the functioning unit is required. So these computers also required some manual form of advancement or manual form of help in order to work this computer very properly. Then another disadvantage is that the commercial production was difficult and costly. So in order to make these computers, the commercial production or in order to develop all these computers, all the parts or all the things were very costly. So it was very difficult and also it was costly. And the last point regarding this disadvantage is that the limited programming capabilities and hence limited commercial use. So the programming capabilities were very limited, and also the limited commercial use was took place. Because of this all these disadvantages, the use of these computers were limited as soon as after all the introduction of these computers. So this is the major these are the major disadvantages of these first generation computers. So we discussed the major advantages and the disadvantages of these first generation computers. So this is regarding the first generation computers. So today we discussed the major contributions by Charles Babbage. They are the difference engine in 1823, then the analytical machine, and also after his death, the group of scientists from the Science Museum in London, a team of engineers, in 1991, they introduced introduced this Babbage's difference engine in a very good manner. And also in 2002, the same museum created a full-fledged model of this difference engine number 2 that weighs 5 tons and had 8,000 of parts. So this is regarding the major contributions by Babbage. Then we discussed about the census in US, which is basically a simple story in which the officials of the US Bureau estimated to take this census, and this census would take up to 10 to 12 years, and after this estimate, they introduced a competition in which they called some proposal to do the census in a better way, and then the Herman Hollerith, who was the winner of this competition, he proposed that the use of the automation machines would greatly reduce the time needed to do the census. And then he introduced the machine, and with this machine the census were successfully completed within just 2 years. And the census data, which is coded into these cards, which is the punch cards, using a key punch, and then the working of this machine was all these cards were taken to a tabulator and to a sorter, and thus all these data, especially the census data, were stored in this computer. And the computer which is developed by the Hollerith machines, or the machine which is developed by Hollerith, were not all used of the all-purpose computers, and there were only a step of just that direction. And then he found the computer tabulating recording company after leaving the US Census Bureau, and then he introduced the IBM, which is the International Business Machine, in which his punch cards were become the national bestsellers, and in 1924 he introduced this IBM. So this was regarding the evolution of computers. So then we discussed the another main topic, which is the birth of computers, and the period was the 1940 to 1950, and this topic, the birth of computers, is divided into major two divisions. The first one was the World War II, and during the World War II, the US Army, they want to brought up a new form of general computer, which is the Mark I, and the US Navy and the IBM began working together in 1931 to build this general purpose computer, which is called as the Mark I. So the first computer during this developed during this World War II was the Mark I, and then about the Mark I, it was the first computer used the base 2 binary. And it was also programmable, and it was made of vacuum tubes, relays, magnets and gears, and it completed in 1944, and it had a memory of 72 numbers, and it performed 23 digits multiplication in 4 seconds. So this was the major advancement in this introduction to this Mark I. Later, after 15 years, they introduced another form of computers, which is purely electronic. And regarding the Mark I, it was based on the mechanical and electronic devices. And the ENIAC, which is introduced in 1946, which is the project completed in 1946, it is basically purely based on the electronic devices. And the ENIAC, which is the electronic numerical integrator and calculator, was proposed by J. Presper Eckert and John Macaulay, and they completed this project in 1946, and it used 18,000 vacuum tubes and absolutely gigantic, in which 100 feet height and long, and 10 feet high, and also 30 tons weight. So this is regarding the ENIAC, and it is about 1,000 times faster than the Mark I, and at the multiplying the numbers, and also 300 times faster at addition. So this was the major advancement in this while introducing the ENIAC. Then we discussed the second phase in the this birth of computers, which is the some concepts or some advancement led by John von Neumann. And John von Neumann helped the work on the ENIAC and figured out how to make the computers better. And Neumann created the idea of stored computer programs, which is very relevant until now, because the concept of this idea of the stored computer program later developed as the form of operating systems. Then the first generation computers, the generation of computers, we discussed only the first generation of computers today, which is the during the 1950 to 1957, and the major computers during this period was the ENIAC, EDVAC, and then EDSAC, and also the Mark I and UNIVAC. The Mark I also comes under this category, and we discussed some advantages of this first generation computers. They are the vacuum tubes were used in order to make this these first generation computers, and also the technology they used was the vacuum tube technology, and the vacuum technology was very helpful in order to make this electronic digital computers. And also the last point in this advantage is that these computers were the fastest, and also they could perform the computations in milliseconds. So this was the major advancement while developing these first generation computers. And also we discussed some disadvantages, in which they were bulky in size and they consumed a very large space, and they were unreliable, and thousands of vacuum tubes were used, and they emitted large amount of heat, and air conditions was used, and they were basically non-portable computers, and the constant maintenance is required, and also the commercial production was difficult and costly, and such other disadvantages. So we already discussed all these points, and this is regarding today's class. For this today's class, in the next class we discuss the second generation computers and third generation computers and so on. So until then, rely on these notes and try to read the textbook and the first module itself from page number 4 to 7, which is the portions that we have discussed today, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.